This is my video summary of the article on the conversation written by Lauren Salish that was published on February 24th, 2025, called Why Including People with Disabilities in the Workforce and Higher Education Benefits Everybody. She starts off with talking about how the Trump administration has repeatedly questioned whether people with disabilities belong in the workplace, and how this stigma reflects or this stance reflects stigma and misconceptions about what individuals with disabilities can accomplish and how successful they can be. This is a negative stereotype, considering that people with disabilities are the largest minority group in the U.S., representing nearly 30% of all the population in the United States, and most people live or work close to someone with a disability. She says that studies that included people with disabilities show that it's good for everyone, not just disabled people. Schools and workplaces are more collaborative and responsive when people with disabilities are included at all levels of organization. In other words, disability inclusion isn't about charity, it's about making organizations work better. I have seen this benefit in my life. I've been involved with individuals with disabilities since I was 10. And I have seen this benefit in my life. I've seen the effects of my own high school before we were being super inclusive to now where it is now and how much better it runs. And I think that's important to realize that it is everywhere and it truly does benefit both parties. She also says that between 40 million and 80 million Americans do identify as disabled. Even if the higher end of this number underestimates the actual number of people with disabilities, because some individuals choose to not identify as disabled even if they have that right to do so, and some of those impairments that people would qualify themselves as disabled would be chemical and pesticide exposure, as well as those who are living with HIV or AIDS can consider themselves disabled as well, but only 15% are born with their impairments, such as paralysis, limb deficiency, or a missing limb, Down syndrome, autism, stuff like that are all along the ones that someone is born with. Then she goes to talk about historical precedents, how they blamed a lot of failure on people with disabilities and color, and this pretty much continued all throughout the early years of the U.S., including into World War II. And that didn't really change until the late 1970s, and they didn't get really any rights until the American with Disabilities Act, or ADA, was enacted in 1990 and was strengthened again in 2008, where it was proven that, yes, this needs to be made this way so we can be inclusive and be really including all of those that are members of our society. This protects people if an employer thought someone was disabled and then denied them the position because of that, they could be the individual is protected under ADA for discrimination, whether or not they actually did have the disability, which is something she states in her article. People say that inclusion is too costly, and accommodating those who do have disabilities is something that most environments cannot provide or do, which isn't true, because they sometimes need more accommodations, but it's not costly accommodations, so it's not a super it's a more cost effective to have them than to not. And she talks about the 2024 Labor Department report, that 38% of people with disabilities and 75% of non-disabled people, they were the same. So only 38% of people working had disabilities, and 75% did not have disabilities, but their working rates were the same, showing that they were able to complete the same tasks. She goes to talk on about how accommodations have benefits for everyone, not just those as examples. The one I really like that she mentioned is captioning. on videos and movies. It was originally created for those who are deaf so they can figure out what's going on in the movie and understand what the speakers are saying, but now it's used for people who maybe need the subtitles in a different language or who are simply trying to understand the movie better. It's also good for people with Down syndrome and depression and those who have harder time focusing on things like movies. Sensory break rooms are also super beneficial for those who have autism and post-traumatic stress, but also just for the regular individual who needs somewhere quiet to focus, especially when in a world that can be so distracting. Ultimately, she just goes on to talk more about how inclusion in the workplace is needed, and especially in higher education, and how it benefits all. And she closes with, ultimately, I believe it's important to create conditions where anyone can thrive, including people with disabilities, which benefits everyone. So I think this is a great article that covers all the topics, opposing sides and supporting sides, and showing why inclusion is so important. And I think it was a great article and super well written.